I've never been a fan of the early hours. They have this way of making the clock tick slower, like time itself is dragging its feet through sticky molasses. But as a 911 operator, it's part of the job. Sit, wait, and try not to let your mind wander into dark places. That night in Pinella Pass, snow was drifting lazily, covering the empty streets with a thin, sparkling layer. It was the kind of scene you'd find on a Christmas card, but for me, it was just another dull night on the job. The old heater hummed beside me as I sipped my third cup of coffee. That's when the phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence like a razor. I adjusted my headset and pressed the button to answer. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was a man's breathless and shaky. There's someone in my yard. I paused, already running through the usual scenarios. It could be anything: a drunk neighbor, a stray animal, maybe just the wind knocking something over. But there was something in his voice. Nervous, sure, but not confused. What's the address, sir? He rattled off a number and street name, middle-class neighborhood on the edge of town. As I typed it in, I heard him swallow hard. Can you tell me what you're seeing? It's a man, he whispered, like he was afraid of being overheard. He's standing near the fence, just looking at the house. I think he's drunk or sick. He's moving. Weird how? There was a pause. I could hear the wind through the phone, the creak of wood in the background, probably his house settling. He's swaying side to side, but the way he's doing it, it's not natural. Like he's unhinged. That wasn't a word I heard often from 911 callers. Something about his tone was starting to get to me. Has he said anything to you? Tried to get inside? No, he's just standing there. But he's smiling. Okay, sir. Stay calm. I'm dispatching a unit to check it out. In the meantime, stay inside and keep your doors locked. Are you alone in the house? Yes. Yes, I think so. That answer made me pause. Was he alone or not? Are you sure, sir? Yes, sorry. I'm just nervous. It's not every day you see something like this. I focused on the keyboard, notifying local law enforcement. As I waited for confirmation, I heard something strange on the line. A faint sound, almost inaudible, like a creak but wet. Sir, are you still there? He's moving again, he whispered. He just did a handstand. A what? A handstand, he repeated, his voice trembling. But it wasn't normal. He twisted his shoulders in a way that shouldn't be possible. And his smile, it got wider. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to chalk it up to imagination, maybe drugs, maybe someone with a mental condition. But there was something about his description. Is he still in the yard? Yes. He's facing the house now, looking straight at me. Are you near a window? I am. Move away from it, sir. Go to another room. Stay safe. Okay. I heard hurried footsteps, the creak of a door. He's still out there, he murmured, almost to himself. A notification flashed on my screen. The patrol car was on its way, but would take at least 7 minutes. I decided to keep him on the line. Sir, you mentioned you were alone in the house, correct? Yes. Are you absolutely sure about that? There was silence. A silence that stretched too long. Yes. I think so, sir. Can you check? Yeah. Hang on. I heard his footsteps climbing stairs, the click of a light switch. Floorboards groaned in the background, followed by something different. A low sound, wet and guttural, almost like breathing, but not quite human. There's someone here, he whispered suddenly, barely audible. "Can you see who it is?" "No, I can hear them. It's coming from upstairs." I glanced at the clock. The patrol car was still 5 minutes away. "Sir, go downstairs immediately. Find a secure spot and lock the door behind you." Before he could respond, I heard a noise. A dull thud, followed by absolute silence. "Sir? Sir, are you there?" No response. The silence on the line dragged on. No matter how many times I called out, there was nothing. "Sir, please respond. Are you okay?" My voice sounded steady, but my heart was racing. The rule is not to get emotionally involved with calls, but that's easier said than done when you hear real fear in someone's voice. Finally, a sound. A faint creak, like wood bending under weight. Then breathing, but not from the man who had called. It was heavier, deeper, almost animal-like. "Sir, nothing. Just that breathing, slow and rhythmic, like a horrifying metronome." I glanced at the screen. The patrol car was 3 minutes away. Long enough for anything to happen. I pressed the button to alert dispatch. "Dispatch, this is operator for 119. The unit is en route, but the caller's line is still open. There are unusual sounds, possible indication of an intruder still on the premises," the officer on the other end acknowledged, but their tone was casual. I got it. It's hard to convey the weight of something like this without sounding dramatic. I switched back to the line. "Sir, if you can hear me, please make some kind of noise. Anything." Another sound came through, but it wasn't what I was expecting. Laughter. Weak, uneven, like someone trying to stifle it. "Who's there?" I found myself asking, the words slipping out instinctively. The laughter stopped, cut off so suddenly that the silence felt even heavier. Then the voice returned. But it wasn't the man who had called. This voice was different. High-pitched, distorted, like someone maliciously imitating a child. "He can't talk right now." I swallowed hard. None of this made sense. None of it. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It came out shakier than I'd hoped. "I'm here," the voice said. Then softer, almost a whisper. "I'm everywhere." My finger hovered over the button to disconnect the call. I knew I should press it, but it was like I was frozen, unable to look away from a disaster about to unfold. "What's your name?" I asked, more to fill the silence than expecting an answer. There was a long pause. When the voice came back, it sounded closer. "I don't have a name, but he knows who I am." The phone felt heavier in my hand. I glanced at the monitor again. The patrol car was pulling up to the address. "Sir, the police are arriving. If you can, go to them." What came next was a sound I can't fully describe. Like metal scraping against glass, mixed with something alive, a muffled, twisted scream. Then the line went dead. When the officers arrived at the house, I didn't hear immediately what they found. Protocol doesn't usually allow operators to get direct updates from the scene. But my monitor flashed with an alert I'd never seen before in all my years on the job. Unusual situation. Investigation in progress. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. For the rest of my shift, every noise around me felt magnified: the hum of the heater, the click of my keyboard, the distant sound of the break room door opening and closing. Then, around a.m., the station called me. "What did you hear on the line?" It was Sergeant Mendez, his voice heavy with exhaustion, one I'd recognize anywhere. I recounted everything: the man, the figure in the yard, the breathing, and the distorted voice. There was a long silence on his end. Was there any interference on the line? Any chance it was a technical issue? No, it was perfectly clear. Mendez exhaled, the kind of sigh that makes your stomach drop. The house was empty when we got there. Doors locked, no sign of forced entry. But there was something, footprints. He hesitated, like he was searching for the right words. Going up the walls, and tracks in the snow that stopped. Right in the middle of the yard. There was nothing else. Footprints climbing the walls. That doesn't make any sense, Sergeant. No, it doesn't. He hung up shortly after, but his words stuck with me. Footprints climbing walls. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, fear. I spent the rest of my shift replaying every detail of that call in my head. I tried to rationalize it. Transmission issues, an elaborate prank, maybe even auditory hallucinations from exhaustion. But none of it lined up with what I'd experienced. When my shift finally ended, I went home. My usual routine shower, coffee, and trying to fall asleep to something light on TV was replaced by a constant state of alertness. Every out-of-place sound made my heart race. I was still awake when I got a text from Sergeant Mendez. Come to the station today. We need to talk about the call. It was unusual for an operator to be summoned like that. Protocol was clear. We were the bridge, not the investigators. Still, if Mendez was calling me in, there was more going on than he'd let on. The station in Pinella Pass was one of those small, utilitarian buildings, just a concrete block with tiny windows. When I walked in, I noticed how unusually quiet it was. Mendez met me at the entrance, holding a coffee in one hand and wearing an expression that looked heavier than usual. Come with me, he said, gesturing toward a small meeting room. There was another man inside, someone I'd never seen before. He wore a black suit that seemed out of place, and his posture was stiff, like a teacher about to reprimand a student. This is Agent Monroe, FBI, Mendez said bluntly. My stomach sank. FBI? Why? Is this that serious? Monroe wasted no time. Operator, can you describe exactly what you heard during that call? I repeated everything, trying to be as precise as possible, even though my memory was already starting to feel the weight of doubt. As I spoke, Monroe listened intently, occasionally jotting something down in a small notebook. When I finished, he looked at me with a mix of skepticism and concern. Have you ever heard anything like this before? Any other calls like it? No, never. Monroe exchanged a meaningful glance with Mendez, who leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Is there something you're not telling me? I asked, feeling the tension thick in the room. Monroe sighed. There's been developments. Last night, after the police arrived at the scene, another 911 call came in. From the same area, another call. From who? That's what we're trying to figure out. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The call was short. There was no human voice on the other end, just sounds. But the sounds weren't. He hesitated, like saying it out loud would make it more real. Normal. I looked at Mendez for some kind of reassurance, but he just avoided my gaze. Do you have the recording? Monroe nodded. I'll play it for you, but I need you to understand that what you're about to hear might be disturbing. The recording began with static. Not unusual for call recordings, but there was something else, a faint tone beneath the static, almost imperceptible. Then came the noises. Footsteps, maybe, but they were erratic, like something stumbling over its own movements. And then the laughter. I recognized it instantly, the same distorted, uneven laugh from the previous night. Every hair on my body stood on end as I listened, my mind snapping back to that moment at the dispatch center, caught between curiosity and dread. What followed was worse. A voice came through, clearer this time, like it was speaking directly into the microphone. You're listening, aren't you? I leaned back in my chair, my mouth dry. The voice continued. You can't hang up on me. You can't ignore me. The recording ended abruptly, leaving the room in suffocating silence. Monroe turned off the recorder and studied me closely. Does this sound familiar to you? I nodded slowly. It's the same voice. The same thing I heard before. Monroe frowned. You don't seem surprised. I've heard it before, I said, my voice barely steady. Where? Here. In my head. Ever since that call ended, that recording stayed with me for the rest of the day. Even after leaving the station, the words, "You can't hang up on me," echoed in my mind, like the voice had latched onto some dark corner of my thoughts. Back at the dispatch center, I found Lisa, my coworker, wearing a concerned expression. You okay? She asked, giving me a look that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. I'm tired. That's all. Lisa didn't look convinced, but didn't push. We've had more weird calls today. What kind of weird? Stuff that doesn't make sense. One guy swore there was someone in his attic, but his house doesn't even have an attic. Another person said they saw something moving in the shadows of their bedroom. And a woman. Well, she just kept repeating, "Don't open the door," for 15 minutes. My stomach twisted. What the hell was happening in Pinella Pass? The shift started slow. A few routine calls, traffic accidents, noisy neighbors, even a cat stuck in a tree. It was almost comforting, given everything that had been going on. Then, around a.m., the phone rang again. 911, what's your emergency? There was a pause on the other end. Not uncommon. Sometimes people hesitate to explain what's wrong. Hello, are you there? Finally, a voice responded. It was male, low and hoarse, like he was trying not to be heard. There's someone? In my yard. My heart sped up. Can you tell me your name and address, sir? Hank. Hank McAllister. I live off Route 12, near the Bend. I knew the area. Rural, with only a few houses scattered along the road. Can you describe what you're seeing, Hank? He hesitated before answering. It's a man, but he's not moving right. He looks wrong. Wrong how? Like he's bent, you know. His arms are at weird angles. He's stumbling, but he doesn't fall. I grabbed a notepad and started jotting down notes. Is he armed? No, not that I can see. But, oh God, he's looking at me now. You're inside, right? All the doors and windows are locked? Yes, yes. But Hank's voice trembled. He's smiling. A chill ran down my spine. All right, Hank, I'm sending a patrol car to your address. Stay where you are and don't try to interact with him. Just tell me what he's doing now. He turned his back. I think he's leaving. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Okay? Keep telling me what's happening. The silence on the other end lasted a little too long. Hank? Are you still there? He's doing something. Weird. What do you mean, weird, Hank? He's upside down. Like he's doing a handstand, but without any effort. Just standing there, staring at me. My pen froze mid-sentence. That's not possible, I muttered, more to myself than him. He's coming. He's moving like that, like a spider. Hank's voice was pure panic now. I could hear him retreating, his breathing growing short and fast. Stay calm, Hank. The police are on their way. You need to get to a secure room, lock the door, and wait. He's on the porch now, Hank whispered. Oh my God. He's on the porch. The sound of footsteps echoed through the line. followed by the noise of a door slamming shut. "I'm in the basement," he said. I locked the door. "Good, Hank. Stay there. The safer, the better." I heard a sound over the line, a creak, like something dragging itself across the wooden floor above him. "He's inside." I swallowed hard. "Do you have any kind of weapon or something to defend yourself?" "A bat." "There's a baseball bat down here. Hold on to it. Don't make a sound. The police should be there in a few minutes." Another sound, this time closer. "It's dark down here," he murmured, almost to himself. Then his voice changed sharp, trembling. "I'm not alone down here." Panic seized me. "Hank, who else is down there? Did you see anyone?" "No," he started crying. "But I can feel it. Someone's behind me." "Hank, get out of there. Go up the stairs now and lock the door behind you." But before he could answer, I heard a horrible scream, and the call cut out. After Hank's call, I sat at my desk staring at the dead phone, feeling the sweat trickling down my neck. It was a kind of fear I hadn't felt since I was a kid, the paralyzing terror that makes your mind conjure monsters in the darkest corners. Lisa noticed my state and came over. "What happened?" "Hank McAllister," he called. "I think something got into his house." "Got in?" The word cut like a knife. Lisa knew most calls about intruders turned out to be misunderstandings or overblown fears. But my expression told her this wasn't one of those times. He described something. It didn't sound human. Before Lisa could respond, the radio on her desk crackled. "Unit 314 here. Responding to the Route 12 call. Arriving in 2 minutes." It was Officer Carter, one of the best on the team. I wanted to grab the radio, tell Carter not to go inside, to wait for backup, but that would break every protocol. Plus, part of me didn't want to believe what Hank had said. Maybe it was just his fear distorting reality. Maybe he'd been hallucinating. I listened as Carter gave updates on his approach. Arriving on scene now. "House looks quiet. No signs of movement out front. Be careful, Carter," I muttered, more to myself than to him. "Copy that. I'm going in to check." There was a long pause, followed by the sound of Carter calling Hank's name as he searched the house. "Backyard's clear. No sign of the suspect," he reported. When he finally entered the house, his tone shifted. "Something feels off in here. Describe it," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "It's hard to explain. The air's heavy. There are marks on the floor, like something big got dragged. Blood? No, just marks." The radio crackled again before Carter continued, his voice lower now. "There are footprints, but they go up the walls." My grip on the chair tightened. Lisa covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. "Carter, get out of there," I said, throwing protocol out the window. "Wait for backup." "Negative. I need to find the resident." More silence. Then a strange sound. A snap. "Carter?" "Nothing." "Thought I heard something." He paused. "The basement. I'm going down." Listening to Carter descend those stairs was like watching a horror movie unfold in real time. Every creak of the floorboards, every step felt heavier than the last. "It's dark down here," he said. "Smells weird. Metallic, kind of. Don't go further, Carter." "Wait for backup. I'm already down here," he replied. "There's no one here." Relief washed over me for a second before he added something that froze my blood. "But there's an open window. Too big for someone to get out, but way too small for anyone to get in." "Carter, leave now." He hesitated. "There's something on the floor. It looks like," the radio crackled, cutting him off. I waited, but nothing else came. Carter, respond. Silence. Lisa rushed to the support radio, calling for another unit. As she did, I kept trying to reach him. Finally, his voice came back, but it was different, slow, shaking. There's something here. I don't know what it is, but it's smiling at me. Carter, get out of there. I can't move. The radio went silent again. When the second unit arrived, they found Carter unconscious in the basement. He was taken to the hospital, but he hasn't said a word since. He just shakes and mutters the same phrase over and over in a barely audible whisper. Don't look it in the eyes. Hank was never found. While filing the incident report, something Lisa said caught my attention. Trying to keep her composure, she let out a whisper. I think I've heard about this before. What? This pattern? Footprints on the walls. The way he described the smile. I've heard something like this before. In the stories my grandmother used to tell. Stories about things that come from the darkness. Things that don't belong to this world. A few nights later, the shift started off unusually quiet. Tuesday nights were typically busy car accidents, bar fights, the usual small-town chaos. But that night, the silence felt off, almost too thick to breathe. Lisa sat across the room, filling out reports. Since the incident with Carter, she'd been distant, quieter than usual. I could tell she wanted to talk about what had happened, but there weren't enough words to make sense of it. Then, at exactly 2:23 a.m., the phone rang. 911. What's your emergency? At first, there was only silence, broken by a faint echoing sound, like the call was coming from a large empty space. Hello, can you hear me? A voice finally came through, soft, hesitant. Yes, I can hear you. It was a woman, young, probably early 20s. She sounded out of breath, like she'd been running. Can you tell me what's happening? I asked, keeping my voice calm. I see something. It's outside. On my porch, I gripped the phone tighter. What do you see? I don't know. It's tall. Taller than anyone I've ever seen. It's standing still, but at the same time, it's not. Can you describe it more clearly? I pressed, trying to keep her talking. Her words came in frantic bursts, as if she was piecing together the impossible. It's trembling, not like a person who's cold, but its whole body all at once. Like it's vibrating, the air seemed to thicken around me. What's your address? She gave me an address on the outskirts of Ashland, near the woods. Are you alone in the house? Yes. Can you lock all your doors and windows? I already did. Is everything well lit? Yes, but it doesn't seem to care. It's just staring at the door. It hasn't moved since I first saw it. I asked her to stay on the line while I dispatched a patrol unit. Officers Martin and Evans were closest, but it would take at least 10 minutes for them to get there. Can you tell me what happened before you noticed it? I asked, hoping to keep her grounded. I was watching TV, she said. Then I heard something on the porch. I thought it was an animal, but when I looked, it was there. I don't know how it got here. I didn't hear any footsteps. It just appeared. There was a pause, followed by a muffled sound, like she dropped the phone. Hello, are you still there? Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It moved. What do you mean it moved? Not much. Just its head. It turned to look at me. But the head, it shouldn't move like that. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? It was like its neck was broken. It turned its head to the side, but the body didn't move. Silence filled the line, broken only by the sound of her uneven breathing. When the officers arrived, they reported hearing noises on the porch, but the figure was gone. They found the woman sitting on the floor of her living room, phone still clutched in her hand. "She's muttering something," Martin said over the radio. "What is she saying?" I asked. It smiled at me, my throat tightened. "Did you check around the house?" "Yeah." No sign of anyone. "But there's something strange. What is it?" "Footprints. Big ones. They start on the porch and vanish into the side of the house. Like someone climbed the wall. But the tracks, they don't make sense. It's like they were made by something unnatural." After Martin and Evans took the woman to the hospital, I sat at my desk, replaying the details of the call in my head, comparing it to Hank's case. The patterns were eerily similar: the silent presence, impossible movements, the grotesque smile. Lisa, who had been listening from across the room, walked over. "This is getting out of hand. I know. Do you think it's the same?" "Things?" I don't know what to think, but deep down I did. Something was connecting these incidents. When my shift ended, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a hazy glow over Ashland. The town looked like something out of a fever dream, every shadow hiding a potential horror. I should have gone home to rest, but unease clawed at me, refusing to let go. Without thinking, I got in my car and drove to the address from the call. The house was a modest wooden structure with a narrow porch, tucked away at the end of a dead-end street surrounded by towering trees. As I parked, I noticed the eerie stillness. No movement, no lights, just the whisper of wind through the leaves. I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under my weight. The sound was loud, jarring. Looking down, I scanned for any trace of the footprints Martin had described. That's when I saw it. The marks were still there, clear and unsettling. Huge footprints with toes too long, almost claw-like. They formed a trail leading to the side of the house, where they disappeared into the wall. Following the path, I reached the exact spot where Martin and Evans said the prints climbed. I looked up. At first, I didn't realize what I was seeing. They looked like scratches on the siding, but as I got closer, I saw they had a pattern. Deep gouges, as if something heavy had pressed against the wood. The marks formed in a regular arc, climbing up to one of the second-floor windows. The glass was cracked, but still intact. My first instinct was to step back, a primal, self-preservation reflex. But at the same time, something pushed me to understand what was happening. I pulled out my phone and took a few photos, zooming in to examine the details of the marks. When I enlarged one of the images, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the reflection of the window glass, there was something. A shape. I brought the phone closer to my face, trying to make out what I was seeing. It was humanoid but blurry, like it was moving too fast to be fully captured by the camera. I backed away from the wall, my heart pounding. Heading back to my car, I noticed something I hadn't picked up on earlier. Every house along the street had its curtains shut tight. Not a single window exposed. The neighborhood felt frozen in time, like the residents had chosen to hide rather than face whatever was out there. My mind was racing. I tried calling Martin, hoping he could give me more details about what had happened that night. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Martin, this is the 911 operator. I need to talk to you about the woman on the porch case." He hesitated before responding. When he finally did, his voice was lower than usual. "I can't talk about that right now. You saw something there, didn't you? Something you didn't include in the report. Listen, man, some things don't make sense. And maybe it's better that way. Just let it go, Martin. This is serious. I need to know what else you found." There was a long pause before he finally said, "After we took the woman to the hospital, we went back to the house for one last look. Evans found something in the basement. What, I don't know exactly. But it reeked of rot. It didn't seem human. And the weirdest thing, yes, the basement lights started flickering, like something was interfering with the electricity. When we looked again, it was gone. Just that awful smell left behind." Martin's words only solidified my decision. It wasn't just curiosity driving me now. It was something bigger, something deeper. And somehow, I knew it was connected to me. As I left the neighborhood, I noticed something that hadn't been there before, a figure standing at the corner of the street. It was tall and thin, with slouched shoulders. Even from a distance, I could feel it watching me. I hit the gas. Back home, my head was full of scattered fragments. The woman on the porch, the impossible noises, the footprints climbing walls. And now, that reflection in the window. Every detail felt like a piece of a puzzle whose center remained empty. My house was dark when I entered, the familiar smell of old wood and stale coffee hanging in the air. I tossed my keys on the table, but the sound seemed to echo more than usual. For a moment, I chalked it up to exhaustion. But then I heard it again. A noise from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was just the pipes creaking, as they sometimes did when the temperature dropped. But as I stepped into the kitchen, something felt different. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. The lights were off, except for the faint glow of the microwave clock. I stood in the doorway, my heart racing as my eyes adjusted to the dark. That's when I saw something that shouldn't have been there. A reflection in the window. It wasn't mine. My hands shook as I flipped the light switch, flooding the kitchen with a harsh yellow glow. The window now showed only my face, pale and frightened. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face, trying to regain control. I was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop. There was something out there. Or worse, maybe it was in here. Then I remembered what Martin had said. The smell of rot in the basement. I glanced at the door leading downstairs. My house was old, built in the 50s. The basement was a cramped space, more of a storage area than anything else. But now, as I stared at that door, it felt like something completely different. An abyss waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to enter. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and opened the door. The air that hit me was damp and heavy, carrying a metallic tang that made me gag. I descended the steps slowly, each creak of the wood sounding like a warning. The flashlight beam swept across the bare concrete walls and stacks of cardboard boxes. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance, but the smell lingered. I moved toward the back of the basement, shifting boxes to see if anything was hidden. That's when I heard it. Not a loud noise, more like a whisper or maybe a rustling. It came from the darkest corner of the basement, where the shadows seemed thicker. I aimed the flashlight, but the light seemed to get swallowed before it could reach the walls. "Is someone there?" My voice sounded ridiculous, even to me. The sound stopped. I stepped closer, trying to keep the flashlight steady. When I finally reached the corner, there was nothing there, just the bare wall. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something on the floor. A mark. It was a footprint. Not like the ones on the porch, but smaller, like a child's. And it was fresh, pressed into the damp cement. I looked around, searching for some kind of explanation. There was none. Then I realized the smell had changed. It wasn't metallic anymore. It was sweet and cloying, like rotting flowers mixed with something chemical. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, with all the lights on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Morning came slowly, bringing with it a new sense of urgency. I needed to understand what was happening, and I knew where to start. I picked up the phone and called the station. Evans. He sounded surprised to hear my voice, but polite. I explained what I had found at home and asked to meet. He hesitated but agreed. We set up a meeting at a cafe downtown. Evans was a stocky man with closely cropped gray hair. He looked tired, like he carried a weight he couldn't share. When he sat down, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he asked bluntly. "Saw what?" "Whatever it is." "That thing," I explained everything, from the call to the marks in my house. He listened in silence, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. "After that night," he began, "nothing's been the same for me. I feel like something's following me. I don't see anything, but I feel it. Sometimes the smell comes back. Other times, I see reflections that shouldn't be there. Do you think this is connected?" He nodded. "I don't know how or why, but something started in that house. Something that won't stop." I left the cafe with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a coincidence. As I drove back home, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The reflection in the rearview mirror seemed slightly off. That afternoon, after talking to Evans, my heart was in a very different place. Not just because of the unanswered questions hovering over me, but because of something else. Something I didn't want to accept. When I entered the house, I left the lights on in every room, an attempt to combat the darkness that seemed to be swallowing me. The reflection in the window, the noise from the basement, the mark on the floor, all these pieces fit into something bigger, something I didn't want to face. But now it was too late. Night fell quickly. Pinella Pass was quiet, but I knew the silence wasn't a guarantee of safety. Sometimes silence is the worst enemy of all. As the daylight faded, I noticed the air felt heavier, as though the house was getting smaller with each passing minute. I spent most of the night on edge, eyes trained on every shadow, every noise, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. For hours, I stared at the walls, at the windows, looking for some pattern, anything to help me understand. What started as a simple nightmare now seemed like an unsustainable reality. That's when I heard the noise from the backyard. At first, it was subtle, but it soon grew clearer. Someone was out there. Not a common intruder, but something else. Something that didn't fit the norm. The noise was coming from the far corner of the yard, near the fence dividing the property from the house next door. My throat tightened. The clock read 2:34 a.m., and the chill in the house seemed to intensify. I didn't bother grabbing the gun that was kept in the cupboard, as if that would solve anything. I knew, deep down, that if it was something supernatural, a simple shot wouldn't do a thing. I took a cautious step toward the living room window. Through the glass, I could see a figure standing at the edge of the garden. It was hard to make out details, but one thing was clear. It was human. The problem was, it didn't look human. The man, or whatever it was, stood motionless, as if waiting, watching, about to do something. The sight of his body standing in that strange position made my stomach tighten. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I was hypnotized by him, as if some invisible force was keeping me there, in those endless seconds. The man started moving, but not like anyone would. He wasn't walking. He was dragging himself, as if contorting under some invisible pressure. As he neared the fence, his movements grew more erratic, more insane. He paused abruptly, as if preparing for something. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. What disturbed me the most was the smile. a grotesque, almost animalistic expression forming on his face in a mocking way. It didn't seem human. It was something distorted, out of place. And yet, there it was, standing still. The terrifying feeling that I was no longer alone in my own house grew inside me. The fear wasn't just about the stranger outside, but something much more intimate, more disturbing. As if there was something in me, something in my mind, that had already been altered. When I finally gathered the courage and went to the door, the sound stopped. With a speed that almost made me doubt it, silence flooded the house. It was a silence so deep, it felt deafening. I was sure the man had reached the fence, but when I opened the door, he was gone. The yard was empty. The streetlight, a dim yellow bulb, illuminated the area, but no one was in sight. I went to the edge of the yard and looked over the fence. Nothing. The emptiness stretched out in front of me, vast like a threat. But then I saw something on the ground. It was a mark, not much different from the ones I had seen in my house. An impression, an irregular pattern. The leaves had been moved, as if someone had hurried past, pushing them aside. A chilling sensation washed over me, a feeling that someone or something was always one step ahead. I rushed back inside, locking the door behind me. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything that was happening. The truth was revealing itself slowly, like a wound being exposed. I didn't want to admit it, but I couldn't deny it anymore. What I was dealing with wasn't human, and this was just the beginning. I sat down in the chair, trying to steady my breathing. The fear was there, but there was something else, something slinking in the shadows. Human instinct tells you the worst is yet to come, and I felt that with every part of me. The next day, the town woke up to a kind of tension in the air, as if everyone knew something was wrong, but no one had the courage to speak it aloud. The atmosphere was heavy, and the looks I got on the streets were different, as if people knew something terrible was about to happen. I went to the station to try and get more information, but nothing seemed to make sense. Evans was there, but he too seemed changed. There was something in his eyes, like he was losing his sanity, a crack in his facade. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me and let out a heavy sigh. "You're starting to see it, aren't you?" When Evans said those words, a part of me knew he was right. He knew what was happening. The town knew. I was the only one trying to convince myself it was all just a series of coincidences. But every new event, every new disappearance, confirmed something I had already feared. What was happening in Pinella Pass wasn't normal. It wasn't something that could be solved with a routine investigation. It was the kind of thing that had no explanation. Something that ran deeper, older, more insidious. That afternoon, I went back home. The house was colder than before, as if something had frozen inside. Every step felt heavier than the last. I knew something was waiting for me there. Not the man from the garden, but something crueler, something more real. The house was empty, or at least I thought it was. The lights were off, and the smell of mold, mixed with something strange and metallic, seemed to be part of the very structure of the house. I went straight to the basement, where I knew the sensation of movement was no longer just an impression. There was a presence. The basement was silent, so quiet that the sound of my own heartbeat felt like a scream. Then I saw the footprints. They weren't human. They were irregular marks, as if something had dragged itself across the concrete floor. They climbed the walls, like an animal, or maybe something less than that, something that no longer belonged to this world. I didn't dare look at the dark corner where the stairs led to the attic, but I knew something was there. Something that watched with every step, with every breath I took. The feeling of being watched was unbearable, but it couldn't be denied. I was being consumed by something I didn't understand, something that had entered my life with terrifying ease. I decided to go to the station. Evans was there, but his expression had changed. His eyes were hollow, as if he was no longer the man I had known. The town was under curfew, but fear, like a disease, was spreading through the streets. "It's too late," he said, without looking at me. "We don't have control over this anymore." I knew he was talking about something far beyond our ability to comprehend. He no longer feared it, but resignation was even more terrifying. I just wanted to understand what was happening to the town. But as he spoke, the feeling that something was inside me, transforming me, grew. When I left the station, nothing felt familiar anymore. The streets seemed longer, the houses more distant, as if the town was pulling away from me. I was alone, more alone than ever. As the night went on, things started to take a darker turn. The town was closing itself off from the world, and those who were still around seemed to be giving in to the pressure, as if evil was spreading, creeping into the bodies and minds of the people. I didn't know who to trust anymore. I didn't know who was still in their true form. It was then, on impulse, that I made the decision to go back home. But when I reached my street, I saw something I could never have imagined. The house was there, but it was different. It wasn't the house I knew anymore. The windows were shut, but there was a faint light coming from inside. A light that didn't seem natural. I approached the door, and before entering, I looked back. The streets were empty, but I knew I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, tracking my movement, my breath. Inside the house, everything was too quiet, as if the air had been drained of all life. The light was coming from the basement, which now seemed to be the only place with any energy. Going down the stairs, I saw it. It wasn't just some strange man's figure anymore. It was something worse. Something I didn't know existed until that moment. Something that couldn't be described by human words. The smile from before, grotesque and distorted, was now on me. I was the next victim, not of a person, but of something that had replaced humanity, consuming everything in its path. I was the prey, and what awaited me down there in the basement, in the labyrinths of the house, in the shadows of my own mind, was no longer a horror story. It was an inescapable reality. I'm the 911 operator, and the scariest call of my life was just the beginning.